global Gender Equality Global Forum that In Our Shoes is hosting. The theme for this particular global forum is Level the Playing Field, and that refers to trying to achieve gender equality in sports worldwide. So, quick introduction to the agenda for today. Kiara and I will give a brief on the In Our Shoes campaign, just a quick share of our vision and mission, and then we'll move straight on to introducing our well-reputed international sports star, if I could say, to our audience. So that will be Nancy. We'll be introducing her to the audience, and then we'll move on to just handing it over to Nancy, and then she will cover her material on gender equality in sports. And after that, we will proceed to a Q&A session that will probably take more or less half an hour to 45 minutes. And post the Q&A session, then we'll move straight on to a concept that we'd like to introduce to the global audience called #Africa for Her. So being South African and being part of the African community, it's something that we'd really like to advocate for. It's a great initiative of the Yali Network. So we'd actually just like to maybe raise awareness around that particular campaign to our global participants. So that's something that we'd like to take the time to do. And then we'll wrap up, and any final thoughts as to how we can move from here and sort of especially support the campaigns such as, or foundations such as Nancy's Champion for Women. So we'd like to hear some thoughts and feelings on that too. All right, and then we'll wrap up. So I see that we do have one participant that has joined us at the moment. So I'm going to just ask all participants to join on the chat and to share the emails and introduce themselves on our group chat. Okay. Let's head straight to the. Sorry, I'm also going to now share. I've got to share just a quick PowerPoint that we've actually put together to show our mission and vision in just a concrete, more of a concrete way. So essentially, as everybody knows, we are our campaign really advocates for gender equality. It's a international campaign that takes a look at many aspects of gender equality. We've had various campaigns, the 5 previous global forums that we've hosted have been on various issues of gender equality. And if I could just, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so there we have it. So that's essentially our logo. It represents our advocacy for gender equality. Our vision is to mobilize the support and progress of the UN Sustainable Development Goal 5, and which is the achievement of gender equality and to empower all women and girls. And we also advocate to acting as change agents in educational institutions, and that's really why we are localized to our institutions, and the projects that we do are locally based. However, the awareness that we raised is it happens sort of on a global scale, and it's really focusing on being a catalyst for projects and student and our youth audience. Our mission is that In Our Shoes is a global gender equality campaign. We seek to dismantle gender-based discrimination, and we really want to challenge society to rethink traditions by stepping out of stereotypes. We also really are driven by the sort of our motto that is don't be a bystander, stand up, stand by her. So that's to encourage anyone in society to really to advocate for gender equality as a collective and not necessarily to act as sort of isolated or that we don't act as isolated change agents, but rather as a collective. And then we really, most of our projects are sort of centered around the goals of Project LEA, which is Leadership, Education and Awareness. And these global webinars essentially focus on the points of education and awareness. And that's what we really aim to do at the end of every webinar to achieve that. Right. So then we're going to introduce our guest speaker. If we don't have any questions regarding what In Our Shoes campaign does, we can maybe hold those questions for the end of the webinar, where we just make it sort of we'll leave some space for an open discussion. So to introduce our wonderful guest speaker, it's Nancy Hogshead Marker. She's the CEO of Champion Women, which is a non-profit organization. It's based in the US and it advocates for girls and women in sports. So Nancy, it's quite a long bio, so if you don't mind, we might read a couple of paragraphs, but we'll definitely, okay, yes, we'll definitely share Nancy's, the Facebook, Champion Women's Facebook page, so Nancy's Foundation for Champion Women, their Facebook page, as well as the link to the website. We'll definitely post that on our Facebook group. So we'll definitely, and we can also post the bio on our Facebook page to make everyone aware of what Nancy does and how to support her foundation. Then we have, I see Julian's also posted on the chat that where to find the link, so we can also just follow that for more information. Okay, so Nancy, she's been a lifelong advocate for access and equality in athletics. She's a scholar, an author, public speaker, and activist. She has a commitment to empowerment, using sport as a vehicle for social change. She leads Champion Women. She's also founder of Champion Women and CEO. It's a non-profit leading targeted on efforts to advocate for equality and accountability in sport. The focus areas include equal play, such as traditional Title IX compliance in athletic departments, sexual harassment, abuse, and assault in sport, as well as employment, pregnancy, and LGBT discrimination. I think what really stood out to us was definitely Nancy's accolades and awards that she's received throughout her career. So if we could maybe, we did sort of move to shorten some, just the highlights of her career, really. So so she was born in Iowa City, so I think that's something important to mention. And then after that, she had moved to Florida with her family. Nancy was a champion swimmer and won 2 gold medals and one silver medal at the 1984 Summer Olympics in LA. After her retirement from competitive swimming, she became a national spokesperson for the National Lung Association. Nancy authored the 1990 book Asthma and Exercise, which was the first comprehensive book on the topic of asthma in sport. Nancy also graduated from Georgetown Law University and University Law Center in 1997, whereafter she then moved on once she graduated to practice. So from 2001 to 2013, she was a professor at Florida Coastal School of Law, where she taught law courses, including, which really resonated with us, gender equality in athletics. From 2004 to 2012, Nancy was the co-chair of the American Bar Association Committee on the Rights of Women. Amongst numerous awards and accolades, Nancy was awarded the 2004 International Women's Hall of Fame recognition. In 2007, she was named as one of the most influential people in the 35-year history of Title IX by Sports Illustrated. In 2012, she received the Advocates Award from the Alliance of Women Coaches. In 2014, she received the Lifetime Achievement Award for Women in Business. And she is currently Senior Director of Advocacy for Women's Sports Foundation, as well as the CEO of Champion Women. She advocates for the equal treatment, or where she advocates for the equal treatment of women and girls in sports. And then lastly, something that has really just, I think, resonated with both of us, since we are both law students, that Nancy really believes that no one should underestimate that one should actually move to understand the law in order to be an effective advocate for equality in collegiate sports. And I think that Nancy really, that's something that you really hold, is that expertise and years of expertise in the field of practice and advocating. To hearing more about that. And then, okay, so if I could just greet everyone who's just joined us right now. We're introducing, okay, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. If you could just add your details onto the group chat, and then we'll move swiftly along to hearing from our guest speaker, Nancy. So over to you, Nancy. Thank you so much once again for being here and sharing with us.
Thank you all very much for having me here. This is a real privilege to be able to share what I know, not just hopefully nationally, but hopefully globally as well. So we're here to talk about gender equity in athletics. And I want to put this conversation in context of women's rights overall. So it's not surprising that if there are issues of women in employment and women being able to inherit and women being able to be free from sexual violence and women, you've got all these different areas, that you would also have issues in women's sports. So this is a slice of sex discrimination that I work on, this, but it touches a lot of different areas because of this, because sports touches so much and such a big part of our culture. In many ways, we think of sports as defining masculinity. In the United States, sports was actually paired with education as a way to make a stronger country and a way to make a better military. So the United States did something that other countries are now trying to emulate, which is to hook their sports program and their educational program together. So, you know, there are lots of minuses to that, but the pluses are is that it gives lots and lots of opportunities to be able to play sports. I'm going to try to see if I can shift now to the, I've got a PowerPoint that I made for everybody here. All right, share screen. So I'm going to share a couple dates with you all first. The dates are 1947, 1954, 1964, and 1972. Ready? In 1947, Jackie Robinson integrated the Major League Baseball. So for the first time, you had an African-American who was playing in Major League Baseball. So really, sports went first before any laws. It wasn't until 1954 that the United States Supreme Court in the United States, we have three branches of government. It's not uncommon in this model of government for democracies throughout the world, but we have an executive branch, a president, then we have a legislature who passes the laws, and then we have a Congress, and then we have a court that interprets the law. So we had a court in 1954 that interpreted the Constitution to say that separate but equal was inherently unequal, and schools had to be desegregated. So it means that schools, that Black children, white children, everybody had to be able, and it just didn't apply just to schools, it also applied to all community events, which meant swimming pools and golf courses and everything, that there had to be desegregation. So that was 1954. It took until 1964 before you had the Civil Rights Act. The Civil Rights Act was these broad set of laws that were meant to undo what was happening in the Deep South in America, of these Jim Crow laws that were keeping African Americans from really being able to participate in society. It had to do with the 64 Acts had to do with employment and housing and public accommodations, being able to go to restrooms, being able to sit at a lunch counter, et cetera, right? So that African Americans, they could travel freely and they could be full participants in the country. And it was a broad set of laws. One of those laws in 1964 had to do with African Americans being able to participate in education. And the law said, basically, if a school receives federal funds, if it gets tax dollars, it can't discriminate based on race, color, national origin. Race, color, national origin. So it took all the way until 1972 before they passed another statute that was fundamental for women in our whole society. Probably no other statute has been more important than this next statute. In 1972, Title IX, they took out those three words, race, color, national origin, and they put in the word sex. So it's the exact same statute, only one protected somebody's race and the other one protected somebody's sex in education. Now in the United States, the way that people increase their social mobility and their income potential is through education. So that's why I say probably no other area of legislation was more important than Title IX. At the time that it was passed, people were mostly thinking about admission into both undergraduates and to graduate schools, being able to go to law school, being able to go to medical school and other kinds of graduate schools. But the law applies to the entire school. So it also applies to housing and to being able to be admitted into the physics program or the English program. It applies to the kind of counseling somebody gets, the kind of educational help that somebody gets. As broadly as you can imagine, Title IX applies. There cannot be sex discrimination at a school. Well, very early on, like within a year, the question was, well, does this apply to sports as well? And the answer came back, yes. And you're probably wondering why. The answer is that the reason why that sports was paired 100 years ago with education was because they recognized that there are things that one learns on a playing field that you can't get anyplace else. So learning about how to win and lose and postpone short-term gratification for long-term rewards and how to be part of a team. I think most people, if they look back on their own sports experience, they would say that it was a big part of shaping who it is that they were. And it's those kinds of educational experiences that women wanted equal access to. And so sure enough, they said, yes, Title IX does apply. I'm going to give you a couple more dates, but so in 1975, the regulations came out saying, yes, it applies, and here's how it applies in three ways. One is you have to give men and women, boys and girls, equal opportunity to be able to participate. Two is if there's scholarships involved, you have to give men and women, boys and girls, equal opportunity to get those scholarships. And third is you have to treat them the same way. You have to give them you have to give them equal facilities and equal quality coaching and equal locker rooms, and however they travel, they have to travel equally. If they equal equipment, equal competition schedules, as broadly as you can say. that these two things are equal. You really, I have 10-year-old twin daughters, and I say that my daughters should be able to walk into most athletic departments and say whether or not these two things, are these programs equal or not. I would have to explain a couple things to them, but overall, that even they should be able to tell. I mean, sometimes you can kind of feel it in the air whether or not those things are equal or not. Okay, now how do I change? Here we go. All right, how do I get to the next slide?
Would you be able to just hit the right arrow key on your computer?
The right arrow key, not working. Usually I press enter. Let me stop share. Hold on. And get to, I'm sorry, everybody.
No problem.
All right. All right. All right, technical difficulties. All right. I'm just going to go without this because I don't want to. There we go. Okay, so we'll just go back to me. All right. So Title IX gets passed, and darn it, because there's some really great stuff I want to show you.
What you could do is email me if you like your presentation, and I can try to share it on my screen. Or if you want to fiddle around with it on your screen, there's no rush. We don't mind just like taking a little pause to figure out these technical issues.
Okay, I want it to be a good program. Okay, all right. I am emailing it right now.
Great. I'm sure we'd love to see your presentation. I'm sure you put in a lot of love and time into it.
There we go. All right. Okay. All right. I just sent it. I apologize profusely.
No worries at all.
All right. Okay. I sent it to Laura. Laura Jane. So, okay. So, what I wanted to show was that in a couple years ago, I wrote a book, and it's called Equal Play, Title IX and Social Change. And one of the things that we look at is this history of the law and how you would think that sports, its ideas about fair play and about following the rules, that it would have been the first to sort of jump on the wagon of equality. And yet, by every measurable criteria, women lag behind men. So even though, so again, three branches of government, we have really good statute. You don't get a better statute than what we have. Two is we have really strong regulations. We don't have stronger or clearer regulations from the Department of Education, the administrative agency from the president's office than we've got right now. And third is Title IX has been uniquely contested in law. I can tell you as a lawyer that less than 5% of cases go to trial, which is a good thing. Usually parties can see where the law is going, and they settle the case. They kind of figure out like, yeah, this person's going to win. Let's make this go away. And and that doesn't happen when it comes to athletics cases. That many of these cases go on for 10 years, and they get pushed really hard. The hard part about that is, of course, is that it's very expensive. It's difficult for plaintiffs' lawyers to be able to bring these cases. But the good part is that it creates this really strong case law in that third branch of government, in the judiciary. So in all three branches of government, everything's moving the same direction. Everything's going forward. And yet, you'll see these huge differences between men and women. Do you have a slide that looks at, it's a graph that goes up like that? It's like a high school. graph. All right, if you're not there yet, that's fine. So, at high school level, you see a difference of 1.3 million sports opportunities between men and women. Good. Okay. So that's my book. Yay, my book. Okay. So again, go to slide number 4. There you go. Click there. All right. So we have everything's on my side. I mean, on the gender equity advocate side. We have, right, equal means equal means equal means it's just not rocket science. My daughter started softball, and within, you can click on it, but started softball, and on their second practice, they're like, well, how come the boys have a scoreboard and we don't have a scoreboard? Or how come the boys have restrooms by their fields and we don't have any restrooms? How come they have a concession stand and we don't have a concession stand? How come they have grass on their field and we don't have any grass on their field? I mean, these are 10-year-olds, like they figured it out. And the reason why this is so important, I think, for everybody, even if you've never done a sit-up in your life, even if you're not an athlete, is that how a school makes these long-term decisions. Remember, the statute is now 44 years old, and how they make these decisions on how they're going to invest in different sports programs sends a strong message, not just to the women who are getting second-class treatment, not just the boys who are getting this superior treatment and think that that's okay, that they should be getting this superior treatment. But it sends a message to the entire school. Everybody there gets to see how the administrators, how a school formally treats boys and girls, men and women. I mean, this is one of the reasons why we tend to think of Title IX as applying. Some people in America think Title IX just applies to sports. And it does not just apply to sports. But the reason why people think that it does is because when you look at a classroom and you see, let's say, an English class or a physics class, and it's half and half men and women, you don't think, oh, Title IX is operating here. You just think, well, that's who had the high LSAT or SAT GPA class, the metrics to be able to get into this classroom. As opposed to in athletics, schools had to start an entirely new athletic department for women because of the real physiological differences between boys and girls, men and women. If you want to give girls an equal opportunity to be able to participate, you have to give them a separate team. So it's rare, right? So we have bathrooms where we sex segregate, and we have sports teams. And that's really about it. Almost everything else, maybe some housing, you'll have men's dorms and women's dorms. But for the most part, these things are most everything else is co-ed. I mean, where people eat and where they get their advising and et cetera. So sports, in one sense, is unique in that it's very easy to be able to tell if there's equality or not. There's in the law, there are two things that people argue about. One is, what are the facts? So in a car accident case, was the light red or green? But in a Title IX case, most people agree as to what the facts are. You don't need to have a third party say, oh, you have 20 women who are on your soccer team, you have 15 women who are on your volleyball team, right? I mean, the school provides that information. You just look at the roster and see how many people are participating, how many teams the school sponsors, what are the budgets that they're spending on both, right? So you can see all those things pretty easily. It's and then the second thing people argue about in a lawsuit is, what's the law? Well, again, we've had 44 years, we've got the good statute, the regulations, and the case law. So again, there's really not that much to argue about, and still we have these huge disparities. All right, can you go to the next slide? So let's see how big these disparities are, shall we? All right, can you go just to the next slide, number 5, please? Is that possible? Go to slide number 5.
Okay.
because I wanted to give you some ideas about, I want to show how girls and boys sports participation has been for the past many years.
LJ and Kiara, are you able to open it on full screen and then, or screen share and then open it on full screen?
Okay. Let's go share screen.
I don't know, for some reason it doesn't want to go.
Okay, then. Is that good?
Oh.
Yeah, but I want slide number 4.
So let's just go
back.
Yeah, go back. Good.
Okay, then go down.
Good. One more. There you go. Stop there. Stop there. Okay. So this is how important that a statute is. So I can't imagine being in a country that has no legal protection for women being able to participate in sports, if there's no legal avenue to make that happen. And the reason why the idea that you would have to go and convince every single athletic director and every single administrator individually is a Herculean task. If you don't have some leadership up at the top that can dictate, that can say, hey, our sports opportunities for men and women, boys and girls are equally important. If you don't have that, we do in all of our formal laws and policies, getting that kind of change is just unimaginably difficult. So you can see in 1971, there were about 270,000 opportunities for girls and women in sports. Just very, very few participated. And how quickly that girls started participating. If you're wondering, like, what is that downturn that happens right around 1977, 78, 79? We had a recession, number one, and then number two is the baby boom was over. So now you had kids who went to school. So there just weren't as many kids in school as there had been just a generation ago. But I want you to notice 3 things about this graph. The first thing I want you to notice is that there's this 1.3 million kid gap between the girls is the red line, the boys is the blue line. There's just no reason why those numbers should be such a big gap between them, number one. The second thing I want you to notice is that in this graph, there is no point when boys' opportunities go down and women's opportunities go up, right? In other words, women aren't taking opportunities away from boys, right? When women do well, look, men do well as well, right? So what you would want to see, of course, is something like this, right? Where men's sports are increasing, but women's sports are increasing even faster to be able to make up for that gap in between men and women. And then the third thing I want you to notice is that since the year 2000, that the gap for men and women, the slide we showed earlier, has actually gotten bigger. So what's going on there? And clearly I'm not doing my job because that should not be happening. That's a bad trend, and we want to make a difference in that. Let's go to the next slide if possible. Is it possible to go to the next slide? I know it's hard, isn't it? Why is it hard? Shouldn't be hard. All right, there we go. So this is the same graph that you'll see. Go back 1, please. 2, please, actually. 1, 2. Another graph. That one. Okay, stop. This is college sports participation. So you'll see this exact same trend. Look at the big gap between men and women, but actually the gap is bigger than you would think it is, because now it's 57% of the all student body is comprised of women, and yet they're only 43% of the sports opportunities. So if the sports participation was the same thing as what the enrollment was, if it was the same percentage, you would see that women would have more sports opportunities than men do, and yet you see they have far fewer. So you still have the big gap. You still have this. There's no place where the graph line goes together. This myth that one of the things we've had to really struggle with is this idea that if you give women equal opportunities and it takes opportunities away from men, the data just does not support that. When women do well, men do well, and vice versa. So that, and then you'll see that since the year 2000, same thing, the gap is actually growing for men and women. So next slide, and we'll talk about this gap growing. All right, so here we have high school participation, and you can see that 50,000 more opportunities for boys since 2004 have been added. Everybody see that right at the bottom there? At 49,053 more new opportunities for boys have been added, more than what has been added for girls. And then let's go to college. All right, and we see 76,000 more new opportunities have been added for men rather than for women. So the gap is actually increasing. Okay, that's bad. We don't want that. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so let's look at areas where Title IX does not apply. And this will show you just how important that the statute is for participation. Okay, so there are anti-discrimination laws when it comes to all the other areas, right? But they're not as easy to measure, and it's much more difficult. And I'll give you an example. Employment law, obviously you can't discriminate because you can't pay somebody less because they are female or because they coach females. You can't hire somebody, you can't not hire somebody because they're female. You can't discriminate based on gender when it comes to hiring, right? And yet it's really hard to show, number one. And number two is if a coach does go and say, hey, I wasn't hired because I'm female, they're likely to get blackballed and never work in the industry again. Both high school and college sports, it's a small closed world. Everybody talks to each other. But just how difficult it is to show that they weren't hired because they're female. You know, when you look at any two candidates for a job, they bring their own unique set of skill sets to a particular job. And it's really easy to say, oh, we picked this person because they had something that this person over here didn't have. Whether it's two males or two females or a male and a female, it's really hard to say this was because of gender bias. It's really hard to prove in court it had to do with gender is the reason why somebody wasn't hired. So you look at in these different areas where Title IX does not apply, and you see these huge discrepancies. This slide has to do with women's sports coverage. This has to do with how much, when you look at the sports pages, or when you watch television, or when you listen to the radio, how much of that has to do with how well women are doing in sports and how well men are doing in sports. And you'll see that actually the percentage of women participating in sports is actually women participating in sports media is actually going down. And there's many efforts to try to combat this. ESPN started another channel, another way for people to be able to get sports coverage. A couple problems. One is when it comes to sports media that if you want to be a sports fan for a men's particular team, it's easy to know when they're playing, when they're on television, and it's sort of, there's a predictability about it. It's really not with women's sports. You've got to really be a diehard fan. It's not something you can casually get involved with. You have to sort of research it. Where is it going to be covered? How is it going to be covered, et cetera. So here you see very little sports recognition. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, this has to do with all the jobs of people who are covering sports. But you see the sports editors, the assistant sports editors, the columnists, the reporters. These are just overwhelmingly male jobs, right? So it's natural that they would be covering men, that they would think that men's sports were the most interesting things, that they would have their own sports background that maybe didn't include women. We remember everybody grew up with these sex segregated sports opportunities. So next slide, please. Boy, that didn't come through very well, but hopefully you can still see that when it comes to administrative positions and coaching positions, that same problem I was talking about earlier about having always, unless somebody has examined their own gender bias, that unless they've recognized for themselves, we know in hiring committees that recognize their own racial biases and their own gender biases, and LGBT biases, that when they're trained on how to recognize their own, that they're much more likely to hire a diverse candidate. If they haven't gone through such training and the leader is, say, a white male, they're much more likely to hire a white male for that position. I've been involved in lots of litigation on behalf of women coaches, and I'll give you an example. The athletic director has their own network of how it is that they look for other coaches. And this one athletic director in particular had no network that included women's sports, even for positions involving coaching women. So they didn't go through, one of the resources would be the Coaching Alliance. They did not go through the National Association of Collegiate Women Athletic Administrators, NACWA. They did not go through NACWA. They did not go through, let's say, the Women's Basketball Coaches Association. So there are these networks for how do you find women, how do you make sure that they know about these open jobs. And, this person was going through the good old boy network, the classic good old boy network that really excludes women from being able to be even in the pool search. So you'll see that while men coach 57% of women, 57% of the coaches of women's teams are male. You'll see that almost no women coach men. It's it's two, usually it's right around 2 or 3%. And usually those are co-ed teams, things like track and field or tennis when you have, or sometimes swimming, but it's usually when the coach is coaching women, they also will be coaching men at the same time, but you'll see it's a tiny percentage. Now, there are real, authentic, important reasons on why we sex segregate when it comes to participation. There is no reason why we should be sex segregating when it comes to employment. Those are two very different things. All right, next slide, please. All right, so as I was saying, we're having this backslide in the law. So why are we having this backslide? Next slide, please. And I'm actually not going to get into the history of what's been going on, because I know this is an international audience and whatnot. But I do want to get to the part of the presentation that talks about intuitively people know that sports is important for their own growth. That this is something I think parents sort of intuitively like, oh, I got to get my kid involved in sports. And we've known for a long time that sports was associated with doing better in school, getting better grades, more likely to go to college, better health results, but it wasn't clear that sports was the cause of it or whether or not these kids were going to do well anyway, right? So whether or not it could be hypothetically that the student athletes were actually they were so outstanding that they're actually being held back by sports because they're spending so much time at their sport. Okay, so it took a woman named Betsy Stevenson, and what she did was she looked at athletic participation rates around the country. Athletic participation rates, people tend to think that sports participation is genetic. I can assure you it is socially constructed, and how I know that is that girls in Maine and Nebraska have 3 times the sports experiences that boys do in Florida and Washington, D.C. Okay, so let me say that again to be clear, everybody. Girls in Maine and Nebraska have 3 times the sports opportunities that boys do in Florida and D.C. So you can slice up the data in lots of different ways on sports participation, but you can do it if a kid goes to a school with a high percentage of students who are on free or reduced lunch programming, they're in poverty, that kid is going to get much fewer sports opportunities. If you live in an urban area instead of a suburban or rural area, you're going to get much less sports opportunities. If you live in the South versus living up in the North, you're going to get much less sports opportunities. So there are all these, different things at play. But no matter how you slice up that data, girls get less. You can actually take off the slide now and just watch me. Okay, so what we know is that girls get less. And what she showed was that these states that were offering lots of sports opportunities for girls, what was happening then to their education, to their employment, and she was actually able to show that no, sports actually causes this. Sports causes these good outcomes. It's not just associated with these good outcomes. So she only could show this data because we have Title IX. So there was a time when there weren't really women participating in sports. Now there are millions, literally, of women participating, or girls and women participating in sports. So she was able to show the before and after. You can't do that with boys because they've always had sports opportunities. So there's no reason to think that just because you can't measure it or because you can't prove it, that it wouldn't be true. If it's true for girls, it's probably true for boys as well, that sports makes better kids, that they do better academically, they do better, they're much more likely to go to college, they're much more likely to take on leadership positions, they're much more likely to graduate from college. If they're girls, they're much more likely to go into STEM courses, they're much more likely to go into graduate school, and probably more importantly, they're much more likely to be involved in the workforce full time. So I think one of the things that, that's what the research shows. Is how important a sports experience is to somebody's growth. I always say that, the least important thing that I got out of my athletic career was my gold medals. Now, don't get me wrong, they're really important to me. I treasure them, and I worked really, really hard to be able to be in the running to be able to get them. But, that was, I swam 32 years ago, 84. Yeah, 32 years ago. So, in terms of being an attorney, in terms of being successful later on in life, in terms of, having a great family life and having a great community life, I really credit my sports experience for teaching me, I had to get in the water a lot of days, on days that I did not want to, with every cell of my body. But I did it anyway because I was more committed to being in the Olympics than I was into being on a good mood on any one particular day. I can't tell you how important that is when you go to become a parent. And, you don't always want to get up and feed the baby in the middle of the night, but you do it because you're so committed to that baby. And you really want to be a good parent. And that sort of takes precedence over being in a good mood on any one particular day. So, the U.S. economy can credit 40% of the increase of women participating in the workforce directly to Title IX, to this one piece of legislation. Okay, so I've talked a lot about the United States, and Champion Women, the organization that I run, I could very easily be in private practice, and I could just do individual cases. But I find that is not, that you can only make so much of a difference. So instead, Champion Women tries to find projects and do projects that are broader. We try to do projects that will have a bigger impact than just what I call the whack-a-mole approach, okay? The whack-a-mole approach is really important when you're establishing case law. As soon as you already have the case law, you shouldn't need to go to court every time that there's a problem, okay? So anyway, so we have all these projects that we're trying to do. But just to be empathetic towards, I know a lot of countries are really starting from scratch. A lot of African countries, a lot of Asian countries, a lot of countries, there really is no mechanism other than just trying to convince somebody as to, hey, you got to give these girls an opportunity to participate. And that's hard for an advocate or for an activist to not have sort of somebody backing you up. I like to say that, like, when I go to talk to a school, you can either believe me now or you can believe a federal judge. And I'm free right now, but by the time you talk to a federal judge, it's, you know, $60,000. So listen to me now. Some areas that we've been involved, I think most of you all know that there's the International Olympic Committee, and then there's the IFs, the international federations. So like FIFA, in my sport, swimming, we have FINA. It's French for essentially the Federal Association of Swimmers. And then you also have national Olympic committees. So in my country, the United States Olympic Committee, the French Olympic Committee, the South African Olympic Committee, right? So you have national Olympic committees. And then each sport in each country has what's called a national governing body. So in the United States, we have United States Swimming, and they are the ones who organize the swimming. So these are usually clubs and sports that are not associated with schools. As an attorney, I have to rely on a different set of statutes to increase opportunities for girls and women in sports at the Olympic level than I do at the school level. As I said, Title IX relies on this particular statute, so it's another statute that I deal with there. And you may have heard that the United States soccer players, the women's soccer players, are now suing, and they're using, part of what they're using is the Sports Act in America to try to say that, look, they're bringing in the money, they should be able to make more money, make more money certainly they're making now, but at least as much as what the men are making. It's great. I mean, you've got the President of the United States who's supportive of their efforts, as well as numerous others who are supportive. So some of the things that I've been involved in that have been very successful is a lot of international federations. We're trying to have women wear sexy clothes as a way to market them so that people would watch their sports. And it turns out, sure enough, there's really good research out there showing that sex sells sex. It does not sell women's sports. So these international federations that thinking like, well, this is how you get more men to watch the sport. In fact, no, you're actually turning off a very large segment. A lot of people who already are watching women's sports are men with daughters. And the whole sexiness really turns them off. They're going to sport specifically to get away from the 99.9% of all this other media that tells women that their worth is tied up in what they look like, is tied up in what Madison Avenue is selling. So, right, they're trying to find something like to teach their daughters about winning and losing and all these great lessons, and they really don't want that. So, let's see, we had boxing that wanted women to wear a skirt. Now, let's just think about that. Somebody gets knocked out, they're flat out and they're wearing a skirt. Yeah, that doesn't go over too well. Two is women who were in badminton. They wanted them to be able to wear skirts. And you may have heard, this was years ago, but Sepp Blatter, who is now out of soccer, really wanted women to wear short shorts, kind of like volleyball players wear short shorts. So again, there's just nothing like having research that shows whether or not that's a successful strategy or not. Other issues that we've been involved in is getting Muslim women to be able to compete while wearing whatever they need to be able to wear. You may have heard soccer now will allow women to wear a headscarf or hijab. We had an issue in weightlifting where an athlete wanted to be able to participate. They needed to cover up their arms all the way, and for most cases in wrestling, they need to be bare arms so you can see if they've locked out their elbows or not. And we were able to get them, as long as it was tight enough, their shirt was tight enough that you could see whether or not they locked out, to enable Muslim women to be able to compete. What are some other international issues that we've worked on? Oh, the whole issue of the soccer players at the World Cup being on grass or on turf. That was an issue I was involved with where I was spectacularly unsuccessful. I was just part of the legal team. I was not actually doing the case, but but for the lawyers that were, the FIFA threatened to cancel the entire Women's World Cup. And as we know, it was just spectacularly successful, both economically and in every other way. So right? But that's how what entrenched sexism looks like, is that idea. I would say that leading the way at the top, that the International Olympic Committee has made a real effort towards gender equity. They have been leaders. They've been sort of far out ahead of a lot of the international federations and a lot of the National Olympic Committees in terms of what it is that they're willing to do to make sure that women have equal opportunity, to be this world stage, to recognize that sport is a human right, that it's not just for men, that this is not the embodiment of masculinity, that this is something that human beings do. So the International Olympic Committee has done a lot. There are a number of things that they could still be doing. One is when they give out money to the different international organizations or the country organizations, that they track that money and make sure that it's not just being given out to men, that it's being given out in this gender equitable manner. If anything, women need to get more because they need so much more seed money than the men do. Men's programs, while they could still be improved, always, there's sort of this infinite request for more money. That women are clearly far behind men. So I think I'll leave that for the end of my prepared remarks and open it up for questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nancy. That was incredibly insightful. I think it's so wonderful also to have some more participants joining us. So really like to engage on some questions that we sort of jotted down as we heard from you. So that was really incredible material, and especially the experience that you have with those international cases. I think that really it resonates globally with all of us, and it's something I think that the participants can also really take note of, and perhaps even familiarize themselves with the content or development of sports, sort of gender equality, in terms of the international law that surrounds sports. As I think some of us, like you say, like you've said, it's not necessarily to talk about or engage in the conversation about gender equality in sports, also for those of us who haven't done a push-up in their lives before. So I think that was really something wonderful to take from what you said, is that even if you're not necessarily somebody who plays sport, but that you can really advocate for sport as a platform for individual development, as well as, sort of promoting that as it's a platform to even engage in dialogue on the concept of it's a human right. It's important for everyone's development, boys and girls alike, and whoever in the community, whatever your sexual orientation is, you should be discriminated against on this platform. So thank you so much for that. Really, it was wonderful information.
Yeah, if I can just add on to what you just said, when we go onto campuses and we try to get more opportunities for women in sports, one place I know that's very difficult to get men or women to really be engaged in the effort is our athletes. And why is that? Because they're so busy. The NCAA, which is a national body that organizes college sports, most of college sports in America, says that athletes spend between 40 and 60 hours a week at their sport. On top of that, they are full-time athletes. So imagine having a 40 to 60 hour a week job, and then on top of that, being a full-time student, right? Carrying a full course load on top. So they are crazy busy. So we find that the who's on our side and who's willing to advocate is it's not that the athletes aren't interested or whatnot. It's just that they just don't have the capacity to be able to do it. So it's usually the Diversity Center, the Women's Center. Usually you can find a professor or two who's really willing to advocate, right? But it's unreasonable to expect coaches who do not have job security at all to be the main ones to advocate. You have to look for outside folks, those people who may have never done a sit-up, but who understand that gender equality in sports is sports participation fundamentally changes somebody and allows them to be able to participate in the workforce and in society in a way that they wouldn't otherwise, to have a different relationship with their body, and to have a early onset of serious goal setting, and a place where being competitive is not seen as gender. It's not okay for women to be competitive. On the sports field, this is a great place to be competitive and to learn how to do that. So, yeah, everybody can do it, not just athletes.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think it's definitely motivated all of us to get onto the sports field at some point. So, Nancy, I think I'd like to also just encourage all the participants as well to perhaps reflect on scenarios that they might have experienced, if it has been recently or a couple of years ago, anything that they could perhaps relate to the scenarios that you have given, some background to. Okay, well, we have these are the scenarios that you've dealt with before in practice, where women have been discriminated in the area of sport. Perhaps if we could hear from the participants after we've introduced some of the questions and we start talking about the questions. After that, after our Q&A panel discussion, I'd like to just do maybe a collective share about different experiences that maybe some of the participants have sort of come across in terms of that gender discrimination. If it happens to be on the platform of sport, then that would be great. But if it's got to do maybe with another competitive platform, maybe Sure. It's got something to do with, in class or anything like that, I'd really like to encourage the participants to share something like that. And then while we have our participants think about, that particular personal scenario, I'm going to pose a couple of questions and then also just open up the floor to really anyone. Julene, if you'd like to jump in with a question, that would be wonderful. Any of our other participants, the participants who perhaps joined us a bit later, maybe Alejandra, or I see we have some other participants here. If you'd like to jump in wherever. Okay, so I'll start with the first question, which I think you've definitely sufficiently covered for us, but maybe just to reiterate it with all participants who joined later. So, Nancy, why do you think that sport is so gender polarized?
Yeah, I think sport is so gender polarized for two main reasons. One is that sports historically defined masculinity. Sports was strength, it was aggression, it was goal orientation, it was the far extreme of here's what masculinity is. And so for women to try to, participate in this, it has been really difficult. I think that's reason number one. Reason number two is because unlike every other field, and like medicine and law and technology and whatnot, right? It's not. Women have their own field, right? So they have their own sports. I'm always amazed that girls who participate on a boys' team or women who participate on a men's team will get all kinds of accolades for how amazing an athlete they are. And what I say is, if you think that, you're missing out on how well women athletes are doing, because you're only looking at boys sports and you're not shifting over here and looking at what these amazing things that women who are participating with other women are doing. Just because somebody's participating with men doesn't make them a better athlete necessarily. The difference between men and women is nowhere near, the difference between the most elite men and women is much closer than is the difference between the average man and woman. The difference between the average man, looking at the averages between men, right? So men, between height and strength and whatnot, right? There's a bell-shaped curve of, say, athletic ability or size and strength. And then there's another curve for women. And the difference between men is as themselves is greater than the difference between the average of men and women together. Does that make, I don't know if that makes sense, but hopefully I made the point that if there was no gender bias, if there was no gender discrimination, sports participation would have happened like that. We would have just given girls more sports opportunities, and instead it has been quite the struggle, a long 44-year struggle that continues to this day.
Thank you so much, Nancy. I think that also perhaps leads me to the follow-up question, which probably would be to where, perhaps first, what can communities or institutions do to facilitate the achievement of gender equality in sport, and who in these institutions should essentially, I think, have the onus to do that, or who in the community should have the onus to do that? Because if we, for example, left it up just to sports management at the University of the Free State's sports management center, I think often there are certain, perhaps only female-dominated sports are then so they'll show their support for female-dominated sports and male-dominated sports. So there won't really be a push for females or women to enter the arena of a male-dominated sports. So let's just give an example of the rugby team. Rugby is quite a big sport in South Africa. It's one of the most well-paid. I think the most well-paid athletes are probably the South African rugby team, and they usually get sort of the most coverage, and it's seen as a real national sport. And it's quite an underrepresentation of females that play rugby, and it's seen as a male-dominated sport. And you really I think there's quite a stigma towards females. Towards women who do play rugby, and that stigma hasn't seemed to sort of be gotten rid of by the institution. So, I mean, really, that's really the context why I'm asking that question. And what do you think in terms of that onus? Who should it be placed on?
Well, first, let me commiserate that we have the same issue in, football. We have almost no football programs for women around the country. And in the United States, football usually has like over 100 participants on one team. So you usually have to have about 4 women's teams to equal 1 men's team. And that just drives the guys crazy because they want to count numbers of teams instead of numbers of athletes. And the law counts athletes; it does not count teams. It doesn't matter sort of what the athlete is wearing. Anyway, so I commiserate, and so much of this starts from the top down. When you look at schools that made a decision that they were going to be gender equitable, sure enough, they were gender equitable, and it really took that convincing. It can either be a fight or it can be easy. And I'll give you an example of how I've gotten some schools to be able to start sports programs. But again, it really comes down to one of parts of my job is that in the United States we have these things called amicus briefs. It's where you explain to a court something about the litigation that they might not know about otherwise. So the parties are very much, they have a page limit, and there's only so much that they can argue for in their case. My job as the advocate is to explain why sports is such an important part of their education, right? Sometimes judges kind of look at me and be like, now wait, this is a federal cause of action. You want kids to be able to swim back and forth in a pool? Really, this is so important? And that's my job, is to explain, to show the research to them about there's no greater way to prevent adulthood obesity than a high school sports experience. A girl is between 40 and 60% less likely to get breast cancer for the rest of her life if she has a high school sports experience. The way you prevent adulthood osteoporosis, which half of all women over the age of 65 have, is through a high school sports experience. So it really starts from the top and convincing them. Sometimes, frankly, if you look at a lot of the schools in the country in the United States that are in compliance, that are doing the best job, they've gotten sued. And so, the top, if you will, that was the decision maker, was the federal judge who said, you will start a women's softball program, you will start a women's soccer program. And right, that was the impetus for starting it. But I think to have those meetings and try to, it sort of takes a village sometimes. So I was working with a particular school. I really didn't want to bring a lawsuit. I really didn't think one was necessary. So I wrote out a letter and explained to them how they were not in compliance with Title IX. And then I shared the letter with a lot of the key decision makers. So it was the board of trustees and it was donors, and the women's alumni associations had really great networks, and they were putting on great programming, and we were able to get this information to the Women Alumni Association, and that made all the difference. And so sure enough, they started 2 new sports for women. So we're looking at when I was saying at the beginning how Champion Women looks for projects that we can scale, that's an example of not going to court, not having to file a complaint with the Department of Education to get where you shouldn't have to, right? It should be done. But in all these other countries, another good place to go is men with daughters. Men who had a sports experience, it was very important to them. And when they get older, they really want their daughters to have that same experience. Men with daughters they give to, they financially contribute to the women's sports, or to Champion Women, and they're just very big supporters. And I can always rely on them to use their networks to help start more opportunities for women.
Yeah, thank you for answering all those, all the questions that we have, and we have actually a couple more to get to, but I'd actually like to just stop myself and just open up the floor just to some of our participants. Before I don't want to dominate the question and answer session that we have. So I'm going to just open up the floor and encourage our participants to ask a couple of questions based on what we've shared now. So maybe Julene, if you have any questions, or we have some of our other participants, Alejandro, if you are online and you'd like to perhaps, or even if any of you would like to post those questions on the chat, and then I could actually pose those questions then to Nancy. So maybe we could just go around and ask, just open it up to a couple more people. That would be great. So I'm going to mute myself now, so you won't be hearing from me. Just opening up the floor to everybody else.
Great.
So I'll jump in. Nancy, my entire perspective of women in sports and how gender equality is playing out on my campus is just completely changed. I always, obviously, I advocate for, more participation, more opportunities for women, but I think it's only, hearing from someone like you who has worked in this field for so long to get to hear you articulate why it matters is really special. You approach it from a civil rights law perspective, and so that just puts a whole new kind of spin on what it means to work in this field. So anyways.
It's a lot of fun. Come join.
Yes. Wow.
Area.
This was so so informative for me. But my question, it's very, very specific to my experience in my campus. So to just give everyone else some context, so my university was found to have violated Title IX by the government, and the administration responded by withdrawing from the agreement. They said that they would investigate like gender inequity and sexual assault in other ways without like having the agreement as like a backbone. And so obviously this spurred a lot of outrage among the students. And so I was wondering, Nancy, what your gut reactions are to that kind of situation, and like how you would, what would you tell a student like me is the best next step to take, because the administration is this big, like, faceless, daunting body. And also, if you were able to sit down with one of our administrators, like, what would you say?
Sure. Okay, well, let me put your question in context, which is, so Title IX, the federal statute, protects against sex discrimination. So that happens in sports, and sexual assault, sexual violence is another form of sex discrimination. So what happened at Tufts University, what happened at this other school, is that 1 in 5 women are sexually assaulted while they're on campus, while they're pursuing their higher education, and that really prevents women from getting the full benefit of education. So what are schools required to do to make sure that that doesn't happen? On 2 areas. One is before it happens, is identify what are the risks out there for women being sexually assaulted. And if somebody's been accused of rape before, if they know about a particular fraternity, or they know about a particular, the athletic housing, or they know about a particular, they've gotten lots of complaints, they have to do something about it. They can't just say, oh, isn't that too bad? And then 2 is, after sexual assault happens, they have to be fair in how it is that they treat both the accused and the accuser. And they have to have an investigation. And they also need to provide accommodations to that woman, whatever it is that she needs. I don't know exactly why it is that the administration, in this case, that the Department of Education said that they needed to do X, Y, Z, and they withdrew from that plan. So I don't know exactly why it is that they did that, but one of the things that Laura and that they were saying earlier was that you don't need to act individually, that acting collectively is really powerful, that joining with other groups is really powerful. On social media, I follow, for sexual assault, ATICSA, the Association of Title IX Administrators. I speak at a lot of their conferences. I follow End Rape on Campus. It was started by a lot of the women who are featured in the movie The Hunting Ground. The Hunting Ground is also another place to follow on Twitter. But to really, I'd say one of the most important things is to educate yourself, and with the idea that, just remember, this is not rocket science, right? That when you hear about what schools are required to do, it's what you would hope that somebody would do if it was you. If it was your child that had been sexually assaulted, if it was your son that had been accused of sexual assault, what would you hope that the school would do? So it should kind of make common sense to you. It should, when you get, when you hear the information, it should, like, hopefully what I said dealing with gender equity in athletics, it sort of, it makes sense. Of course, you'd want equal scholarships and participation opportunities, and you'd want to treat them the same way, kind of, right? That's, okay, I get that. And so same thing with sexual violence on campus. In the past, 1 in 5 women were being sexually assaulted, and all of that harm was being absorbed, all of the cost of that was being absorbed by women. So their counseling fees, their increased educational fees, they may have needed to drop out of school for a bit, repaying their student loans, on right, all of the costs associated with that, which it can be very expensive to be sexually assaulted, were borne by the individual woman. Instead, we're saying, no, the costs associated with that need to be borne by the university. We need to make sure that, they're doing whatever it is that they can to prevent it. And then once it does happen, because it can't prevent them all, is making sure that person gets treated fairly and gets their academic life back on track as quickly as possible. Does that help?
Yes, very much so. I was actually not really expecting that. Like, you brought it back home to, like, what would the, what would you do if this was you and your child? Like, I had just kind of expected you to kind of bring in more like statistics and like that kind of stuff to an administrator who's dealing with this. But like, I guess, like you said, at the core of it, it's like, it's a human thing that we do.
Right. Well, so I'll even make it more human so when I was in college, I was sexually assaulted. Mm-hmm. So Duke has 2 campuses, East and West Campus, and I was out running in between the 2 of them, and somebody grabbed me and pulled me into the woods, and 2.5 hours later, I ran and I went straight to the police department, and I was a little cuckoo there for a while. I mean, I had a great case of what now we would know as PTSD. So this was 1981. This is before we knew a lot about PTSD, but I didn't really have a model. I didn't really, I knew I was acting a little crazy. I used to get up at night and check to make sure that the doors were locked and the windows were locked, 20 times a night. Not that many, but a lot of times a night. And sort of, when you're lying there and you've already checked that the windows and doors are locked, let's say 5 times, the windows and doors are locked, but I still couldn't help myself from going and checking that. And so when I think of all the things that Duke University did to make sure that this was a blip on my academic screen, I'm just so grateful. So I dropped 2 classes right away. My other 2 classes, they allowed me to take incompletes. I had never been in a car accident before. I've never been in a car accident since then. I was in 2 car accidents, bang, bang. And at the second one, they said, get on a plane, don't even pack, just drive to the airport, just go home. You need to go be with your family. And I did. And so I took 2 incompletes. My professors had to create all new exams for me to be able to come back. I had a hard time walking at night. They gave me a special parking pass that everybody else was very jealous of. I had... What else did they do for me? I moved my campus so I didn't have to walk through woods. They moved me onto what's called Main West. And so they gave me counseling, of course. And so because of that, it was over. I mean, I was non-traumatized in, 4 to 6 months. And I was able, I went to summer school. I was the number 1 athlete on campus, and they let me redshirt for that year. So they recognized this was very serious. So I didn't compete for a whole year, and they gave me my full scholarship. And, without all those accommodations, I doubt seriously that I was right on the precipice. I think of it really could have gone quite badly, and it didn't. But it's only because of all of the help it was that I got. So one reason why I got a lot of help is because, number 1, people believed me. I was beaten up very badly, and it was a stranger. It was that 2% of rapes. It's a very small percentage of rapes. I didn't know them. I wasn't drinking. I wasn't. Okay. So people believed that it happened. 2 is people also believed in the depth of my emotional experience. So those 2 things meant that I was able to get help. So what I find really stops women from being able to recover, and men too. Men are sexually assaulted as well, for sure. But what stops them is that they're not believed that they were sexually assaulted. So it was somebody that they knew, or they had sex with before, or that they had been flirting with or drink. Okay, so for whatever reason, they're not believed, number 1. Or 2 is they're like, well, get over it. This happened and you were passed out. So why is it so emotionally charged for you? And you didn't even know what was going on, right? So they don't believe when they say that they need an academic accommodation, they're like, "Ah, you're just trying to get out of something," right? So, that really stalls recovery is when you combine those two things.
Well, thank you for sharing that, and it's also helpful to see how a university can respond appropriately.
Yes.
Everything from a parking pass to, moving you to a different housing location. Yeah. So thank you.
Yeah. When some of the things that a lot of people, so I do this as part of my practice now. I just share that just to, I think I'm 54 years old. There's not enough 54-year-old women who are over the hump, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's so much shame associated with rape that they, as soon as they're over it in particular, they just stop talking about it. And it's important for I think 54-year-old women who have, I've got a great family and a great community life, and I love my profession, and I get to be in things like this to talk about having gotten over that hump, right?
Mm-hmm.
So professionally, what I do is what a lot of women need is they need to be separated from their rapist to make sure that, so they need do not contact orders. Mine was not a student at Duke, and they never caught him. But for a lot of women, they have to run into them in class all the time, and it prevents them from really being able to. They just get so upset. I can't imagine ever having to see my rapist again. So that they need that. A lot of times they do need the housing accommodations. But I'd say one of the main things, particularly with female athletes that are sexually assaulted, is to ease up on the requirements of their day rather than trying to say, oh, yes, you need counseling. So you need counseling every day, and you need to go to a study hall. In addition to that, you need to go get tutoring. In addition to that, you need to go get medical care, right? And so this person's already crazy full schedule is now doubled. And that's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah. Thank you for answering my question. I don't know if others have comments. Okay. It looks like Alejandra. All right. Go for it, Alejandra.
All right. Hi, everyone. Nancy, thank you for sharing your story and your experience. I have learned so much. And, the women in sports, it's not necessarily new, but I'm learning a lot lately. I kind of first got introduced to it when I was learning about human trafficking in sports and being prominent, and how the relationship with women and whatnot. So now I joined this organization called 925, and it's a membership-based organization of working women. And we were at the Capitol in Denver, Colorado, advocating, and the organization was handing out little postcards about the U.S. soccer team issue, and to all the representative people at the Capitol. And I thought that was amazing. I was shocked. I was a little bit surprised, but I didn't realize how big this is, and how, the importance of how you were mentioning earlier, participation of girls in sports during high school, and how that affects them in their careers later on, in their lives later on. So it's great that this is being talked about. I didn't realize how important it is, and so I was also surprised when I learned about the U.S. soccer team filing the complaint. I thought the statistic, I believe there was in the New York Times, that they were getting paid a quarter of what their counterparts on the men's national team receive. So I think when you hear something like that, you really have to stop and pay attention. And it's just unbelievable that this is happening right now. But back to the Colorado thing, it's getting, attention here. Denver's a huge sports town, and, people are hearing about this, and I think it's going to create a movement here. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what comes next.
Well, good. Well, if you could, you can follow Champion Women on Facebook, and we usually post something about once every other day. But it's, Champion Women does legal advocacy. So we're on the legal side of things. We want to promote, more women participating in that way. There are other groups that actually fund programs for girls to play sports. We don't do that. There are other groups that fund, say, research or whatnot. The Tucker Center does a great job with that. So, so you want to, if you're interested in this topic, please follow us on Facebook. As well as join our listserv. When you go onto the Champion Women website, it'll ask for your information. We have newsletters and whatnot that go out that talk specifically about sort of the politics and frankly, it's a two-way street. I'm always looking for ways to get the change happening to scale, and not just the women's soccer players, although I think that is actually a way to get change in that particular case to scale, because it's a brand new type of case.
Right.
But how do you use what the people who came before me have already done to make it better for all girls and women?
Right. Thank you. Yeah, I will check out the website and subscribe to the newsletter. I'll also share it with the team at 9 to 5. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I really do. Thanks.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you so much, Alejandra, for sharing that information as well as asking such an important question. So thank you very much, also just for participating once again in this forum. It's really just been so great to have your input. I think I'd also like to just ask if there's anybody else with questions as well, any of our other participants. If we could just give a moment for you to maybe think of a few questions, and then maybe to follow up on that point that Alejandra also made, that she'd love to follow your Facebook page, Champion Women. I think maybe I could just ask Nancy, how else would we be able to really engage with the work that Champion Women is doing specifically? I think something that maybe we could also share where I think South Africa's just really on the brink of engaging with that rape and violence against women on campuses. We haven't experienced that before. I don't think there's ever really been such a movement towards advocating, against that on campuses specifically. So to give some context as well, there's a university called Rhodes University in the Grahamstown area in South Africa. Mm-hmm. And they have just, there's been a recent case where students have actually, there's been a couple of female students that identified alleged rapists on campus, on the campus, and they identified these students, and they gave the names of these male students to the Student Representative Council on campus. And then there was this outrage amongst students, both female and male, that they questioned why did these female students, why did the victims actually do this, and wasn't this the victimization of male students, and is this really the Student Representative Council? Is it really in the jurisdiction? Does the institution even have the power to, for example, take action? And then as a result of that, you had more female students coming out and saying, well, we believe that the victims of rapes on campuses should be allowed to do this, or should be given more sort of support or a platform to actually, voice these sort of incidences. And then there was a naked march. I know it actually sounds quite strange, but South Africans sometimes tend to do things in the extremes. So there was a sort of a half naked march that women participated in on the Rhodes campus, and which sparked even greater debate. But I think the whole intention of that march was to say that it doesn't matter what you are
What you're
wearing,
wearing. Right.
where you are. You should always, as a woman, you should feel comfortable in any space on campus. That you shouldn't have to have that burden of you need to provide your own protection. You need to take extra measures to protect yourself. And I think that's really on campus, we are inundated with that responsibility as female students to, you always have to make sure that you protect yourself.
Yeah. All the burdens on the woman. Yeah. Let me ask you something. In South Africa, if there is an issue of sexual violence, let's say in the workforce, so if one employee is said to have sexually assaulted another employee, what happens in the workforce in South Africa? I know what happens in the United States. What happens in South Africa? Do you know?
There is definitely there is legislation in place that protects women regarding sexual harassment.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think that women in education should expect exactly what women in employment expect, right? So you would expect that they would, provide due process for the men, but have it be a fair process that is equal on both sides. When it comes to criminal law, it's not equal on both sides. Criminal law is we put the thumb on the scale of the defendant. We make it much, much harder for the prosecution than we do for the defendant. When it comes to employment, when it comes to education, it's a 50-50 world. One of those students is likely to leave campus. So why put the thumb on either one of them? Why put the thumb on either scale? Make it right, but to have an investigation, and then we're not going to have people on our campus who sexually assault. What we know about what's called undetected rapists, what we know about people who are not in prison or they've never been tried or whatnot, but who will self-identify that they have raped, that they have had non-consensual sex, is that on average they'll have 8 rapes, and the average rapist. So most guys are not rapists at all. I just can't imagine my husband ever, doing something that was against anybody's will. Most men are not rapists, but the ones that do, oh my gosh. So something that everybody can do is when you hear those sexist comments, if they're said around my husband or said around my 15-year-old son, it's going to fall on deaf ears and they're going to ha-ha, and they're not going to act on it. But there may be somebody in that group that would act on it, that would get confirmation from somebody else that that they're going to validate this rape culture point of view. So that's why it's important for everybody to call out rape culture. And these acts, I wouldn't feel very comfortable walking naked, across someplace, but the idea that consent isn't implied by what somebody's wearing or flirting or drinking or where they are or how much power it is that they have. What I tell my 15-year-old son is, you don't just want consent, you want enthusiastic consent. You want to make sure that person is like, yes, I want to do this with you, and to make sure that they have the capacity to consent. So are they falling down drunk? Are they slurring their words? Have they thrown up yet, etc.? Those are all signs like, stop, they don't have the power to be able to consent. So, what we can ask schools to do is exactly what we ask employers to do, is to make the space safe for women in employment, to make the safe space for women in education, that all the costs, all the harm associated with having these rogue rapists out there isn't borne just by women.
Thank you so much, Nancy. We just have a question on the group chat from Kevin. It reverts back a bit more to the sports that we were speaking about in your research. And he asks, as things stand now, there's definitely room for improvement when it comes to sport and gender equality. What does research show in regards to the improvement for the future, such as job opportunities and other various opportunities?
Wow. And I see that this person is calling from the United States. So I'll answer it from a U.S. perspective. So back, about 20 years ago, the NFL started something called the Rooney Rule. The Rooney Rule says that in every final candidate pool, there has to be a minority in there. There was a big discrepancy between who was playing sports, what the racial makeup of those playing sports and what the racial makeup of those administrators and coaches and people in leadership, powerful money-making positions were. So they instituted, and it's been wildly successful. And so, it's not perfect, believe me, but there, right. So there has been a push towards having a Rooney Rule when it comes to both colleges and the Olympic movement, to make sure that in all of these, the hiring committee, that they get both training on their own unconscious bias, and that they that there's a woman and a person of minority that's a person of color that's included in the candidate pool that they can choose from. They've done research on unconscious bias in every way that you can imagine. So unconscious bias would be, you have the exact same resume, and either it has a African American sounding name or it has a Caucasian sounding name. You have the exact same resume and has a male and a female. And white males get 3 times the callbacks that people of color and women get. You can do the exact same research if you're told to listen to some music and you're told that the person who's doing it is a person of color or the person is a woman. It's seen as not as good music than if they're told that the person behind the curtain is a white male. They took research proposals that, again, person of color, Caucasian, women, men, and sure enough, it was seen as better research proposal, more likely to get funded if it was done by a white male. So these are all ways that both men and women do this, right? It's kind of like I describe sexism as like rain. It hits on everybody. And it's not until you have this personal awakening as to, how sexism and racism is affecting you personally that you're likely to jump out of the box. So until people use that research on unconscious bias and apply that not just to the hiring of the person, but also to who gets promoted and who gets, right? So there's all this other unconscious bias. We're seeing it play out in the presidential campaign right now with Hillary Clinton. I mean, if Hillary Clinton acted the way that Bernie Sanders acts with, waving around and being sort of unkept and, people say it's really authentic and they like that he's very authentic. There's just no way women are just held. She is so scrutinized for what the sound of her voice is and whether or not she smiles. Bernie Sanders never smiles, and she's told she's supposed to smile. What she's wearing, she gets a whole different evaluation than men get. And so once you can kind of see how men and women are evaluated differently, then that's when you can start to change it. But, there are 2 types of racists. Let's say there's the overt racist or the overt sexist as well. Somebody who thinks women are not as important or not as good as men are, who thinks that in America, African Americans or blacks are just not as good as Caucasians. So that's the overt racist. That unfortunately is still very much there. But equally as powerful is somebody who really wants to do the right thing, but they have this unconscious bias and they think that they evaluate men and women on a totally different scale. When I was working at a big firm, all of my evaluations said Nancy's a very aggressive, ambitious woman, and she really needs to watch how she comes across to other people. There were no men who got that same critique or same, told that sort of had to watch their, whether or not they were ambitious. I saw do you guys know what The Onion is? The Onion, if they write these satirical pieces in the United States, it's very funny. Oh my, but one of the the onion pieces was, Hillary Clinton is too ambitious to be president of the United States. Right. And I think it's so funny because, well, somebody that thinks that they have the audacity to be the leader of the free world is crazy not to, nobody would ever say that a man is too ambitious to be, the leader of a country. So anyway, that's sort of a long answer there about what can be done. There's this Rooney Rule that schools can implement. There's some actually good things right around the corner. I'm on a committee for the NCAA, and I really can't say exactly what's going to happen, but there are some really good things. 2 is, for women in particular, you need to network to be able to get into these networks where people get hired. 3rd is it's not fair to say, we know that women just 6 months after they get the job are making less than what men are getting. It's not fair just to say, so the answer is we need to teach women how to negotiate. No. You have to change the system. It's not fair to put the burden on the change on women. The system needs to change so that people can recognize this unconscious bias and not act on it. So those are some suggestions, some things that I would say for change for the future.
Okay. Thank you so much, Nancy. I think you've really just given all of us so much to think about. And I think you've particularly highlighted that it's just so global, the issue, while, it can sometimes remain a sort of very specific issue to whatever scenario that you're dealing with locally. I think you've also still maintained that global sort of undertone that really, we can advocate for gender equality within sports, regardless of whether we are, these Olympic athletes, or, regardless of whether we've even stepped into a gym. So I think that's really, you've made it so universal for all of us. So I think that it's really inspired us particularly as well to maybe as a challenge to think of sport as a medium or platform for advocacy. And I think that's something that we could really strive towards, especially even in our own campaign. And I think that, we should also just encourage everybody else to do the same. There is just one last input from Kevin. I just want to quickly share it. He shared it on the group chat. So Kevin says that there is a trend showing itself in American colleges where more women are going to college and more men are going directly into the workforce. My university, for example, is 60 to 70% female. How do you see this affecting the US as well as universities across the US? So thank you so much, Kevin. I think we'll take that as perhaps the last question that we'll pose to Nancy, and give Nancy some time to answer that, and then we'll wrap that the entire webinar up with our last final points and our goodbyes. Okay, so over to you, Nancy.
Yep. Well, I think in order to identify what the problem is, you have to look not just at are women attending college, but also what majors are they going into? We know that the more women that are in any profession, the less that they're likely to make. So it's just not true that a janitor is more important than a teacher is, but janitors make more money because more janitors are male than teachers make. And that's just one example, right? So we want to make sure that those 60 or 70% being in college doesn't necessarily mean that they're going towards something that is going to increase their economic capability for the rest of their lives. So we need to make sure that more women are going into STEM courses, and that they have access to graduate school and into some of these male-dominated areas where the money is. So 2 is, to the extent that men feel that that they don't want to compete on that level with women, that for some reason they don't want to go to college, or that they're hampered, that they're going straight into the workforce and they're giving up, they're leaving $1 million on the table. I mean, we know that what a college degree means to somebody. that some people do, but in likelihood they're not going to make as much money. So whatever that, I think some of that has to do with this idea of hypermasculinity. So I was a swimmer, and in swimming, men and women, girls and boys, work out side by side together. So they swim lap for lap, and they lift weight for weight with men and women. Wherever I went, universal, I swam really fast in practice. So if you didn't hear the first part of the introduction, I did go on to win 3 gold medals in the Olympics in swimming. So I swam really fast in practice. And without exception, when I went to a new team, my experience was that I was sexually harassed. So they'd like pinch my butt and try to say, you have to give your times to the coach. Like, so let's say, you're doing 200s. You have to say what your splits are, whatnot. And the guys, like, they just wouldn't believe me, and they'd like mock me and whatever. And they'd make a big deal about it. And it took about 2 weeks. And after 2 weeks, it would end. And they sort of had to turn me almost into a guy. They had to, some people describe it as I had to be that girl, but I had to, they had to see me not as primarily female, but as a fellow teammate and a competitor. They had to respect me for what it was that I was doing. I wasn't trying to hurt their masculinity. I wasn't trying to hurt them. I was just trying to be the best athlete that I could possibly be. I had a coach one time that tried to shame some of the male players and saying, I can't believe that you're letting a girl beat you, and you guys need to go, and right. And I pulled that coach aside. And I was young at the time. I was like 16, but I knew already that you are making my life miserable. So cut it out. And he did. And, things got a lot better. But so I think to the extent that when men and women go to college, they're competing. And for the most part, they're competing on an equal basis. And they don't get some sort of boost the way that they do in the, sort of this recognition that they are, so that's what I would call an unhealthy masculinity. That's where being masculine, being a male, actually hurts them in being able to achieve whatever it is that they want to do. If the idea that they can't be head-to-head competition with women, and that's so threatening to who they are, that's going to keep them from being able to accomplish what they want to. There's a great former NFL football player, Joe Ehrman. He does a great TED Talk, but he talks about unhealthy masculinity. He's this like 6'6", he's probably 65 years old. He still looks like a football player, but he says it's, unhealthy masculinity is this idea that your maleness stems from being strong, from making a lot of money, and from having lots of women. And that recipe is a recipe for disaster for women, because it doesn't recognize women as people, and it has to win. It has to be on top. There is no sort of community, if you will. There is no equality between men and women in this unhealthy version of masculinity. So, I think that's part of why a lot of men are not going to college. Another big part, of course, is cost. We know that African-American men in particular are much less likely to go to college, and it's just expensive. And so whatever we can do to get the cost of education down so that they're able to participate in the workforce. Something that keeps both men and women from participating in the work or in education is being a parent. So having good access to birth control, having access to their own bodies so that they can determine when is the right time for them to have a child, to bring a child into the world. Because both men and women, that is one of the reasons that will keep them from getting their education is having a child. So anyway, I think, you got to figure out what the barrier is, and you got to make sure that, you can't just look at the aggregate number of 60 to 70% are women. You need to look at where it is that they are in education, and looking at what's keeping men from being able to participate in higher education, and make sure that it's not that hypermasculinity, and making sure that there aren't economic barriers to keeping men from higher education as well. So thanks for that question.
Okay, thank you so much, Kevin. Thank you for posing that question, and really just so informative in the way in which you answered that question, Nancy. So thank you very much for that insight. I see that we just come to the end of our in our global forums. So I want to thank everyone again, all the participants, and really thank you so much, Nancy, for such informative content that you shared, especially the presentation that you put together for us. I think it was quite, it was so amazing to see the statistics, because visually you can actually determine, what is the real differentiation between men and women in sport, in terms of, so much that you actually mentioned their pay, the opportunities that they receive, and then we can determine, okay, tangibly, what is it that we are working with at the moment, and then from there decide, okay, so how do we improve it, where we should start. So I know we wanted to share something very special about the hashtag Africa for Her initiative. Maybe we can just share that on our Facebook page. We'd like to share that, with all our participants. So we encourage our participants once again to follow our Facebook page. It's in our shoes, and maybe Julian will also just post that link on our chat. And then, as we also follow Champion Women, that Facebook page, we'll just encourage everyone to follow our Facebook page, and the link to the entire recording of the Global Forum will also be posted once we have received it from Jeline, then we'll post it on our Facebook page as well. So I think we'll just encourage everyone to go relook at that. And from our side, I think you've definitely motivated us to really strive for more awareness in terms of using sport as a platform for gender equality, as well as a greater understanding, because I think so many of these issues are really niche, and sometimes we have that knowledge, of that niche aspect of gender equality to really approach such unique situations. So thank you so much again, Nancy.
You're very welcome. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Yeah,
thank you.
It's terrific.
Thank you again. Yeah, we'll definitely share it to so much more people, and we encourage our participants as well to share Champion Women's Facebook page as well to as many people as what they can, and then we'll do the same on our platform.
Perfect.
So, great. Anything from Juline's side? I think I'll hand over to Jeline, and any last thoughts or comments? Maybe Nancy, you'd like to share something, just a last bit of maybe encouragement to the students out there to act as advocates for gender equality.
Well, I'll quote, something that Hillary Clinton said back in 1983, that women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights. And that this effort to get equal opportunities in sports runs parallel with all these other issues of sexism that women face, whether it's violence, whether it's opportunities in the workforce, whether it's in education broadly, or what all these different areas, human trafficking, that sport is one part of that. And I need help if, particularly those of you who are students, we usually have about 4 research assistants per semester. So if you'd like to be a research assistant, or if you'd like to have a year-long program, we need that as well. It's another way to get involved. But thank you again for this opportunity to be able to participate. This is a great way to get the word out.
Yeah, I don't have much else to add logistically, but thank you, LJ and Kiara, for facilitating. You always do a wonderful job. And obviously our participants, thank you for the questions. Nancy, I wish every child, teenager, and young adult could hear you speak. I can't even imagine how different our world would be.
Oh, thank you.
So thank you for taking so much time to be fully engaged. You really tried so hard to respond to our questions so thoroughly. It's very appreciated. So I'll be sending this recording out to thousands of students. Hopefully they'll watch it, reflect, share with their friends. And yeah, we'll keep spreading the word about all this advocacy. I'll share the links on an e-list. So yeah, thank you everyone, and I hope you all have a phenomenal weekend.
Yeah, you too. Take care.
Thank you. Bye everyone.
Bye.